Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is Tuesday, it is the 13th day of October, and I do indeed welcome you to today's edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. It is a pleasure to be with you. And on this absolutely beautiful day, of course, we're counting down the beautiful days as we move closer and closer to winter, and the temperature seems to drop a few degrees each day, and we know what's coming, but boy, it is gorgeous out there today here in Appalachia. I hope it is where you are as well. I want to thank you for your trust, your faith in the Head On Radio Network, and in particular for those of you tuned in today to the Virtual Center. I want to thank you for tuning in. Yesterday, for those of you who were listening, know that yesterday was our first live broadcast in a couple of weeks, and I actually felt quite a little bit under the weather yesterday and was not really that happy with the program. I did get a few comments about it, complimentary comments about it, and I appreciate those very much, but I didn't really feel that I was on the top of my game yesterday, but maybe that's my perspective. You know, I don't know. Maybe I just sort of let those of you out there make that call. But some days you feel like things are connecting and the points are coming together and falling into place, and other days you feel like that's not happening. And I felt like that yesterday. I had this nagging cough. I probably still do. But I'll be honest with you, I haven't really had a problem coughing since the program yesterday, so I'm assuming everything will be okay. I sure hope so. I know that attitude-wise, I feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more eager to do a program today than I did yesterday. So I want to thank you all very, very much for your continued support of this program and of the Head On Radio Network in general. And again, I want to call your attention to this evening's Democratic debate, and I've been talking a few minutes before we came on the air today with Bob Kincaid, and Bob's going to be broadcasting his program live from Uptown Beckley here in southern West Virginia. They're having a debate party. They're opening a theater here so that people can come and watch the debate together and react, and Bob will have the microphones live, and we'll be broadcasting from the Raleigh Theater and Tavern here in Uptown Beckley, and I plan to walk up there early this evening as well. And I'm hoping that perhaps if you happen to be tuned into Bob's program tonight, I may be able to get a word or two in edgewise in the course of tonight's program. And I know our friend Wayne will be there. He's kind of the organizer of this whole event. So I've been telling people, making reference to the fact that tonight is the big debate. And of course, I always, in my own mind, I say to myself, I hope it's a big debate. But anyway, I think that there's no question that the Republican side has received most of the media attention so far, and part of the reason is of course because Hillary Clinton has had such a monumental lead throughout. Although the Bernie Sanders surge is getting more and more attention all the time. So I think tonight's debate will be significant. And of course, there are some candidates that really haven't received all that much attention at all on the Democratic agenda tonight. Jim Webb from Virginia, former Governor O'Malley from Maryland, and Lincoln Chafee from Rhode Island. So it looks like it might be a very, very interesting evening, and I suspect that we'll have a comment or two to make about it in tomorrow's program as well. I would love to hear from you. I put on the Facebook page today, a few hours before we went on the air, a little bit of an outline as to where I thought we might go today in our abbreviated program. You are aware, of course, that we begin on Tuesdays 30 minutes later than we do on Mondays and Wednesdays. So tomorrow's program will be a full 2-hour program. We'll begin at our regular time, which is 1 p.m. in the East. But today, again, because it is Tuesday, we are starting 1/2 hour later, and that allows us to finish at 3 p.m. For make room for the next program here on the Hit On Radio Network and the Rick Smith program. So I do look forward to hearing from you. We do have a phone number, and I would love to hear from you and get your thoughts on some of the issues we've been addressing. The phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And, of course, as you know, 4676 on your keypad translates into Horn, H-O-R-N. If you would like to address or deal with me directly one-on-one on some of these issues, I would love to hear from you via email. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906 @gmail.com. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we do have a Facebook page. If you go to Facebook and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will see our Facebook page, and you will note that the most recent posting on it is one that I made a few hours ago, which kind of laid out an outline of today's program, which suggests that we would be looking at, for the most of our program, we'd be looking at a review of the Declaration of Independence from the perspective of Carl Becker, which is review. We dealt with that a couple of weeks ago. What I wanted to get to today for the bulk of the program is the Constitution of the United States through the eyes of Charles Beard and his economic interpretation of the Constitution. But more important than that information itself, I wanted to, again, if we do have time, if we don't, we can complete it tomorrow. But what I wanted to address primarily was the essence of, the essence of the reality that how we look at the Declaration of Independence and how we view Federalist Number 10 and the priorities surrounding the ratification, the design or the development of the Constitution of the United States are dictated by through the views of Charles Beard, and what that means in terms of our nation and the ability of our citizens to understand the political republic in which they live and in which they are expected to participate. It seems to me very significant that people will not go to the Declaration of Independence itself or the Constitution itself in order to derive substance and understanding from the document. Rather, they will go to the Carl Beckers or the Charles Beards or somebody else who has studied the subject in depth and will rely on what they tell them the original or the primary document means and is about, and what its motives were, its ultimate purpose was, its intent, all of that. It seems to me that's very significant because it creates a very narrow perspective. It tends to cause us to come to issues and our understanding of events with blinders on, so to speak. We tend to look at the primary document, if indeed we ever do, and that's what we've been doing here at the Virtual Center, is focusing to a large extent on primary documents, whether they be documents out of the 18th century, whether they be significant letters about the period, whether they be Supreme Court decisions, dissenting opinions of Supreme Court decisions, or whatever. We've been looking at the texts themselves. But the point that I would make is that if our understanding of the Declaration, using that as an example, is taken principally from Carl Becker, then we are looking at the Declaration of Independence the way that Carl Becker tells us it makes the most sense. The result of that is that we're looking for certain things, we're overlooking certain things. There are elements of the document itself that we probably will never notice or never see because we haven't been alerted to or programmed to look at those. Rather, we'll be looking at other aspects of the document, and more often than not, what that's going to do is reinforce and ratify the interpretation that really controlled the way we approached the document in the first place. In other words, if we've read Carl Becker's Declaration of Independence, then we're going to look at the document itself from Carl Becker's perspective. We're going to see what he saw. We're not going to see what he didn't think much of or didn't think worthy of extensive comment. So consequently, our interpretation of the Declaration of Independence is going to be, unavailingly straight Carl Becker. And ditto for Charles Beard. Let me make one comment here, and it is in the context of an oversight or an apology, and I want to thank Horst, who sent me an email just before we went on the air alerting me to this, and he's exactly right. In posting the note on Facebook today, I had made the point about Carl Becker's approach to the Declaration of Independence and Beard's reading of the Constitution of the United States. And of course, and Horst pointed out, and he's correct, that really what Beard did was introduce Federalist number 10 as the way to look at the Constitution of the United States. And so Horst's point, which is well taken, is that maybe it would be more accurate to say Carl Becker is to the Declaration of Independence as Charles Beard is to Federalist number 10. And indeed, to be point on, that's exactly correct. And I want to thank Horst for pointing that out. However, I think there is still something to be said for the fact that what Beard was successful in doing was resurrecting Federalist number 10 from the pile of 85 letters, Federalist papers that existed, that were written in support of the Constitution in late 1787 and 1788. Federalist number 10, for the first century and a half almost of the nation's history, was relatively non-existent to the general public. Most people, because of the priorities of the periods in which they lived, focused on other aspects of the Federalist Papers. We'll hopefully get to this a little bit in today's program. And it was not until Beard's publication of his economic interpretation in 1913 that Federalist number 10 emerged as the premier document from the Federalist Papers. In other words, it went from almost relative non-existence to being the premier document in the whole collection, which essentially means, I think, that many, many people became familiar with Federalist number 10 and concluded that it pretty well described the whole rationale behind the Constitution of the United States. And so, in a sense, it's a little bit indirect. I don't think the analogy between Beard and the Constitution is incorrect. I think Horst is right. I don't think it's as direct as I implied that it was, and I take that comment advisedly, and I thank him for it. Before we get into this in any depth today, and again, if we don't finish it today, we can surely return to it at the front end of tomorrow's program. I wanted to revisit a couple of things that we talked about yesterday, and more specifically, the education issue, the Common Core issue that we spent the bulk of our second hour of yesterday's program on. And you will recall, if you were with us yesterday, that I brought back from our travels to New England, I brought back a copy of Connecticut's Common Core standards for the 4th grade. And the reason I did that is because my wife's granddaughter is into the 4th grade in this new school year, and her mom wanted me to see the document that the school sent home explaining exactly what they were doing and what she as a parent could expect, as far as her daughter's performance and all the rest of it. So she gave me a copy of the document, and that's the document that I was referring to yesterday. What I wanted to do is look at the literature from a state that has totally embraced the Common Core. And of course, as I mentioned, I live here in West Virginia in a state which is rescinding its initial support for the Common Core, as politically the state moves from the blue column into the red column, and much of what we read locally about the Common Core is negative, or has been negative, and the political climate in the state is such that it's very difficult to argue for the Common Core in ways that are successful because people don't want to hear it. Many of them have already made up their mind. In other words, many of them have become so embedded and so absorbed into the rhetoric of the right, so to speak, that they have bought into the criticisms of the Common Core and really aren't that eager or aren't that anxious to look into the document in any depth. And that's why I wanted to introduce a document from a state which is embracing the Common Core. And I went through yesterday and looked at the 10 learning objectives, if you will, of the 4th grade in the state of Connecticut. To be very honest with you, my goal yesterday, as much as anything else, was not just to introduce the learning objectives, especially in English language arts. Because as we know, the Common Core focuses principally on mathematics and English language arts. And in fact, the social sciences, history and geography and psychology and political science and all of those under the Common Core rubric fall under the heading of English language arts. And so by looking at the objectives for grade 4, one of the points that I hoped to emphasize was the fact that these objectives were for the 4th grade. As we went through the 10 objectives yesterday about being able to find the principal theme of a story, being able to defend it with evidence as being the principal theme, being able to compare and contrast ideas, characters, themes, perspectives from what we read, the ability to write passages which convey meaning to those who read what we write. In other words, not just a couple of connected or vaguely connected sentences that may or may not seem to be related at all. What the objective here is to write a passage, develop a theme, transition from one event to the other event, and bring the whole issue to a conclusion, to a logical conclusion, and do that in a way which other people can read and understand. When you look at all of those things in the abstract, they sound very, very noble and very creditable. But when you consider that these are learning objectives for the 4th grade, it seems to me you have to pay attention. Because realistically, we are dealing with a society in which our young people, many of them graduate from high school and are never able to to accomplish these kinds of objectives, to do and understand these kind of outcomes. In fact, it is becoming clear that many of those who carry college degrees have never really become proficient in these particular activities and skills. Here in West Virginia, as I mentioned, I taught history for a number of years, close to 50 years. And half of those years was spent teaching here in West Virginia. My total higher education experience here in West Virginia totaled about 25 years. Actually, a little bit more than that, 26 years. So half of my life in higher education has been spent here in southern West Virginia. And I have seen students at the college level who have been struggling terribly to try to do the kinds of things that the state of Connecticut is asking its fourth grade teachers to do. For me, that's astounding. Because I think it tells me exactly, it gives me some idea as to how far behind our kids are. And how non-competitive our kids can be on the national level. It seems to me to scream for raising the bar, for embracing these standards, and for getting to the business of educating our young people. But lo and behold, the state is still functioning, I'd like to say in the 20th century, but sometimes I wonder if it's even earlier than that. The thing that probably bothers me more than anything else about this, and this is very personal, is I have this nagging feeling that if you were to peel away all the cover and all the rhetoric and all the baloney that people throw at the Common Core. They don't like it because the Obama administration supports it. They don't like it because it seemed to emanate from the federal government, when in fact it didn't. They didn't like it because it seems to be an example of the federal government dictating curriculum, which it is not. And on and on and on. When you get cut through all of that and you peel all of it away, I have this nagging sense that there seems almost a fear to allow our children to even have a shot at these kinds of skills. There has been this adage here in West Virginia, southern West Virginia, which, as many people know, is coal country. There's been this adage here that many of the people in West Virginia don't want their children educated because if they get too educated, they'll leave because there's nothing here for them other than the mines. And so if they don't go into the coal mines, then there's little economic opportunity here. And so consequently, our best and our brightest kids have traditionally been leaving the state. West Virginia continues to lose population. And of course, as the coal industry is on the probably the steepest decline it's ever been on, I think it's the final decline between you and me, then the exodus from the state is even more dramatic, at least from the parts of the state that have for so long depended on coal. And there has been this adage, and I've been wrestling with it since I came to West Virginia in the early 70s, that when you get down to it, parents in this area don't want their kids educated because they don't want their kids to leave. They want their kids to stay here, and the only way to keep them here is to keep them ignorant. I refuse to accept that. For years, I rejected that. But the more I listen to the rhetoric and the more I hear people attack the Common Core, the more this nagging sense begins to become stronger and stronger and stronger within me that what these people are really saying is, if nobody was listening and all the microphones were off, I would acknowledge that the Common Core probably offers a level of educational opportunity to youngsters that our kids have never had before. But I don't want them to have it. And therefore, I'll embrace whatever argument or whatever case, whatever rationale. You know, if the right wants to attack the Common Core because they're connected to Obama or the power of the federal government or federal government dictating curriculum or whatever it happens to be, I'll support any of those arguments, because the one thing I don't want is change. I can't prove this, but it continues to nag at me. And as I look at these objectives from the state of Connecticut for fourth graders, all I can think of is, can you imagine if our kids were successful in mastering these skills and these objectives at the fourth grade level, what we'd be dealing with 7 and 8 years from now when they reach their junior and senior years in high school and when they entered college? Can you even imagine the level of expertise and the ability for self-learning and analysis and analytical skill building that our youngsters would bring to the table in less than 10 years if we were to buy into this now? And the irony is, in the literature we read yesterday from Connecticut, even they acknowledge that they are late getting on board. They point to the state of Kentucky, which has been on board even longer, and they point out that the first year their scores went down. But then Kentucky turned it around in the 3 or 4 years after that. And Connecticut expects to do the same thing. And if West Virginia did it, West Virginia would experience the same thing. We've got 1 year of testing under Common Core. The results are just coming in now here in West Virginia. We haven't even had the results to analyze yet. And already we've drawn the conclusion that they don't work and they need to be rejected. If that doesn't suggest to you that the motives are political and not academic, then I don't know what is. In looking, in putting a few thoughts together for today's program, I was looking again at these objectives for the fourth grade. And I ran across something that I never even thought about sharing with you yesterday, that I thought in this review in the first part of our program today that I would share with you, because in many ways this material is even more astounding to me than what we looked at yesterday. This is a page in this packet of materials from Connecticut. And this is a review of what children have already mastered in the third grade as they now enter the fourth. What we looked at yesterday were the learning objectives for the fourth grade. And of course, as we know, we're into October of that school year. So we're not very far into the fourth grade academic year as yet. But lo and behold, you look at this page which says what your child learned in grade 3. And I looked under English language arts and I'm thinking, these are the skills that Connecticut children entering the 4th grade are coming with from what they learned in grade 3. I circled 5. There are 10. I circled 5 because I wanted to, first of all, these 5 are not, close analogous to the learning objectives in grade 4. In other words, these are a little bit different. These are things that have already theoretically been done and don't need to be mentioned again. Here's one that I think you might find interesting. Comparing important points and details in 2 texts on the same topic. Let me repeat that. Comparing important points and details in 2 texts on the same topic. Exposing young people in grade 3 to 2 different interpretations of the same subject. Like, for example, Gary Wills's book on Inventing America on the Declaration of Independence versus Carl Becker's book on the Declaration of Independence written in 1922. The Wills book emphasizing the Scottish Enlightenment ideas that motivated the language in the Declaration of Independence, as opposed to Becker's argument that Jefferson took the Declaration of Independence straight from the second treatise, Philosophy of John Locke. Asking people to confront 2 different interpretations of the same issue and beginning that process in grade 3. This isn't even mentioned in the 4th grade learning objectives because in theory it's already been done. What does this mean? It means that Connecticut kids in grade 3 are learning skills that our kids never learn. Because to be very honest with you, many of the school teachers that I have seen in our public schools can't do this either. Because I've taught them in graduate classes, and they can't compare and contrast differing interpretations of the same subject. They can't. And I have found myself trying to teach them how to do that. In Connecticut, they do it in the 3rd grade. That's one that I circled. That one struck me particularly hard because it's something that I've been after. I mean, what have we done here at the Virtual Center? We've been dealing with the Scottish Enlightenment ideas as they affected the Declaration of Independence. And we've been looking at Carl Becker's interpretation and John Locke's second treatise on civil government and the whole idea of the Declaration of Independence as being straight from Locke. And then we have looked at, and we have seen, and this is really a review of the first part of the main highlight of today's program, I believe. And then we've looked at the impact that the Becker interpretation has had. We look at the reality that Gary Wills's interpretation is barely even known to the general public. Most people have never heard of these ideas of the Enlightenment, of the Scottish Enlightenment. Most people have never heard of the idea of a moral sense in man. The idea that Enlightenment thinkers really believed that man had a conscience, an innate sense of right and wrong that directed his behavior. And as Jefferson told us in that famous letter to Peter Carr in 1787, oftentimes if man goes with his gut rather than what he has learned by experience or in school, he's more likely to be on the right track. Because following what is innate, what your innate sense is telling you to be right, is usually the track you want to be on, says Jefferson. That is a Thomas Jefferson that none of us have ever been exposed to in school, ever. The textbooks don't deal with it. What do they deal with? They deal with John Locke. They deal with the issue of unalienable rights. They deal with the issue of property. They deal with the issue of equality. They deal with the issue of freedom, liberty, opportunity, the need to work hard and acquire property and pursue success, all those things that feed into the capitalist ethic. That's all they learn. As far as we know as students, that is Thomas Jefferson. The fact of the matter is we know that that is not Thomas Jefferson. In fact, one of the things we've discovered here at the Virtual Center is there's probably more of the other Thomas Jefferson than there is that one. He was aware of it. Clearly he was aware of it. But there's nothing to suggest that he embraced it. In fact, there's everything to suggest that he embraced the idea of the moral sense and the idea of man's conscience and man's innate sense of goodness. And of course what that does is once you accept that, once you buy into that and saying, this is Jefferson, this is what he believed man was all about, then you begin to look at this idea of factions being sown into the nature of man, that man being driven exclusively by self-interest. And you begin to say, wait a minute. If this negative interpretation of man's nature is being imposed on Jefferson and then given to us as if it were Jefferson, then maybe the same thing is true with the Constitution. And then you begin to wonder whether, in fact, what we know to be true about our nation's history is true at all. And once you are there, then it seems to me you must confront the question, if this is what's being given to us and is being told to us as truth, then who's doing it? Where's it coming from? Who's funding it? How are they able to pull it off? And then you begin to look at the Common Core, and you begin to see skills within the Common Core which would allow youngsters as early as the 3rd grade to begin to equip themselves to be able to resist this kind of one-side, authoritarian, dictatorial, didactic argument. 3rd and 4th graders who have been taught how to compare two differing interpretations on the same subject are not going to fall for the idea that this is the Jefferson that is true. This is the Jefferson you must know and believe in. What they're going to do is they're going to go and look at Jefferson and seek answers to those questions themselves. That's lifelong learning. That's self-education. That's skill. That's ability. That's maneuverability. That's adaptability. One moment. I apologize. I got so excited I tore my headphones apart. So, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is all the things that we say we want our young people to do in the 21st century, the skills for success in college and in the workplace, career skills, success, all of these things require this kind of adaptability, the ability to confront new situations and have the skills to deal with them productively and positively. All of those things. This is the way you do it. This is clearly the way you do it. Let's look at another one of the third grade. What your child learned in grade 3. Asking and answering questions about what they read by referring directly to parts of the text. In other words, what did you see in this story or in this episode or in this event, in this historical event or in this poem or in this novel? In your own words. And once you get that, then you follow it up with the question, where in the story is your evidence for believing that? Where did you get that? Take me to the places in the story which gave you the ammunition or the data you needed to reach the conclusion you just gave me. Grade 3. Next item. Reading stories and poems aloud fluently without pausing to figure out what each word means. I'm kind of guessing here, but I'm suspecting, given his background in the classics, that our friend Bob Kincaid could be pacing the floor there in studio with some of these things, because I know that that this is that this is right up his alley. Some of this stuff, reading stories and poems aloud. Let me stop there. Not even get into the second half of this. One of the things that I have learned over the years in trying to deal to help students, assist students who have difficulty reading. One of the things I learned very quickly is that all students, no matter how well or how poorly they read, can think. They can understand. If they hear information, if they're exposed to information and they understand it, they can react to it. Consequently, I learned very quickly that the way for those who have difficulty reading to read more substantively and more successfully is to read aloud. Because when you hear it, it makes sense. Sometimes when you read the words on a page, it doesn't. If you can parlay those two things, if you can read the words in the book and hear the words at the same time, it tends to reinforce understanding, and it tends to improve cognitive skills and comprehension skills in reading. I have found over the years that one of the best ways to assist poor readers in reading better is to encourage them to read aloud. If they can get audio versions of books, and they can listen to the audio version and look at the text at the same time, they will quickly begin to associate meaning with language. Or maybe the best way to say that is the other way around. Associate language with meaning. I have found over the years it's an incredibly successful and efficient shortcut to improving reading skills. But there's more to this than that. Reading stories and poems aloud fluently without pausing to figure out what each word means. Learning to conclude or to deduce meaning from the context, from the way the word is used in a sentence or in a paragraph. To allow the situation you're reading about to give you hints as to what the meaning of a particular new word means. So what you want kids to do is read stories and poems aloud fluently. You want to hear the flow. You want to hear the emphasis. You want to be able to pick up the punctuation, the commas, the periods, the underlines, the emphases, the bolds, whatever you want to call it. All the hints associated with sound that help us master meaning. Basically, this particular item is based on the idea, this was a big battle in education in the 1980s, over the so-called whole language approach to teaching reading. That instead of teaching kids to sound out vowels and consonants, to sound out each letter, sound out combinations of letters, and then sound out entire words, that what we were encouraging our kids to do, especially those who ended up to be the slowest readers, is to focus on the words rather than the meaning within which the words are used. I can attest to the fact, because I can tell you that I can't even count on both hands the number of students who have come to me over the years and say to me, I'm really struggling in this course. I read the text. I can read the words, but I have no idea what they say. It doesn't mean anything to me. And then I go back and I reread the same sentence or the same paragraph a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And finally I just get so frustrated I close the book and I quit. And figure maybe if I come back to it in another time, it'll be clearer to me. This became a major political issue in the 1980s between liberals and conservatives. Whether you teach reading using the whole language approach, or whether you continue to teach reading the traditional way, which was sounding out letters and vowels and consonants and phrases and paragraphs and all the rest of it, and focusing on the pieces, assuming that eventually the pieces would be put together into meaningful sentences and paragraphs. The whole language approach was based on the idea that good reading happens when understanding happens. When people can understand what they're reading and appreciate what they're reading, they become better readers. But rather than allow students to read for ideas and meaning, we have continued politically to focus on this idea of piece after piece after piece, and eventually the ability to read would surface. I might tell you that the teaching experts, the reading experts, have concluded that both of these, that good reading is a combination of both of these. I think we could probably all agree on that. But the fact of the matter is, there's political meaning to this controversy. And the political meaning, briefly, is as follows. If you teach reading via whole language, if you're teaching ideas and you're encouraging youngsters to read for the ideas and overall understanding, you are exposing kids to meaningful ideas very early in their educational lives. Rather than do that, we have withheld that opportunity from most of our kids and insisted that they go through the step-by-step, piece-by-piece process of learning by sounding out vowels, consonants, phrases, and words. Many of them quit and never get to the point where they really learn how to read. How many adults, how many times do we hear about adult literacy being a major issue in this country? For those people that are in prisons, those people that quit school in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grades, they have never learned. There's no way they can appreciate learning because they've never done it. They've never been allowed to do it because they weren't able to pass the basic requirements necessary to give them the key to learning. The whole language approach was to basically open up the beauty and the wonder of learning at the beginning, and assuming that young people would become so excited that they would teach themselves to become good readers. So not only is there a difference in how to teach associated with those two approaches, there's political meaning as well. And I think that political meaning is becoming very, very important again as we debate the Common Core standards. There's no question that when we look at these learning outcomes for grade 3 in the state of Connecticut, we all must confront the fact that we may live in places where our kids never get to this stuff. That many of the people who teach our kids have never gotten to this stuff. They have never gotten beyond the point of sounding out letters, sounding out consonants and verbs, putting together the words of sentences. Think in the old days in your grade school when the teacher used to ask children to get up beside the desk and read the next sentence aloud. And children would get up there and they'd read the words. And then they'd sit down and the teacher would say, wonderful. But nobody ever said, what did those words mean? To many kids, they meant nothing. They were just words. Now we put them in college and we give them a 400-page textbook. And we tell them they're going to have a test on the first 4 chapters of the textbook in 2 weeks. And it is presumed that you will have read and mastered what's in those 4 chapters. And there's no way they can do it. There's no way, unless you begin to teach them how this early. One additional item: planning, revising, and editing writing using resources and supports from peers and teachers. Planning, revising, and editing what you write in the 3rd grade. Most of the time, our teachers, almost by necessity, have been forced to accept any writing at all as a positive. The idea that students would take comments and criticisms and corrections and go back and rewrite what they wrote and turn it in again in an improved version, most students won't do that. Most teachers won't ask students to do that because they don't want to read the same set of papers twice or 3 times. They don't have the time, given the size of their classes. What they basically assume is, I'll take this for now and I'll assume that the next one will be better. Until you start to improve the one you just did, the next one can't be better. And then finally, conducting short research projects that build knowledge around various topics. Not telling kids what the information on a particular topic is, but sending the kids out to research their own information and figuring out the meaning for themselves. That is 5 of the 10 learning objectives in the Connecticut Common Core Standards for Grade 3. What we looked at yesterday, which were the learning outcomes or the learning objectives for Grade 4, were based on the assumption that students coming into the 4th grade already could do the things we just talked about. Tell me, academically, what is there about the Common Core that people object to? I think if you begin to look at all of the literature and all the criticisms of the Common Core, you find very little based on the standards themselves. Very little on the substance, because the substance is beyond criticism. As I was thinking about this today, in preparation for today's program, a perspective hit me that probably should have hit me before. It may have hit a number of you folks already, but it had never hit me in this context before. And I kept thinking back to the 18th century, and I said, what's the difference? What are we talking about here? I was thinking of Jefferson and Benjamin Rush and many of the people that wrote on education and talked specifically about education for the masses, and never talked about this kind of education. This was the kind of education that the children of the elite received. This was not the kind of education that you ever wanted the masses to receive. If that is not, in part at least, some explanation or some reason behind the opposition to the Common Core, I don't know what is. Here's the perspective that occurred to me today in a context that never occurred to me this way before. What's the difference here? We talked about Jefferson. I mentioned here on the Virtual Center some months ago, after we looked at Thomas Jefferson's General Diffusion of Knowledge document, that it was very clear to me that Jefferson envisioned 2 different systems of education, one for the masses and one for the leaders, one for the elite. But then when you look at the substance, you look at the essence of the education itself, and that's what these objectives give us. This tells us what these kids are doing, what these kids are being taught how to do. When you look at that and you realize that the children of the elite got this kind of stuff, the children of the masses got something quite different. They were taught to read in a particular way. They were taught to study in a particular way. They were taught to think in a particular way. They were taught to seek truth in a particular way, namely by what they were told by those who knew. then what is the difference between the two approaches? And the more I thought about that today, the more I began to think, maybe this is the issue that's really confounding the nation right now. Maybe. The education of the elite in the 17th and 18th century, which was an education built upon the principles that we're seeing in some of these Common Core learning outcomes, could be clearly seen as a level of education designed or intended to educate the children of the upper classes for the positions of power and leadership they were expected to inherit. To these people, education was not the ticket to opportunity. Education was the preparation for an opportunity that you knew was automatically coming because of who these kids were. In a sense, what society's leaders were telling us in the 17th and 18th century is the following. Our children, the children of the elite, the upper classes, are destined to be tomorrow's leaders. They will be our leaders. They will be our representatives, our governors, our tax collectors, our sheriffs, our county officials, etc., etc., etc. They will be our leaders. Therefore, we better make sure that they are intelligent enough and sharp enough to fulfill the responsibilities that they are destined to inherit. What about the masses? The masses were being educated not for positions of influence and power, but to be citizens in a society where they would have no position and power. Their education was not one of preparing them for a future of change. Their education was to indoctrinate them and prepare them for a future which was already determined. Consequently, the priorities and the mechanisms of the education they receive would be dictated by what the outcome was expected to be. To Benjamin Rush's The Mode of Education Proper in a Republic for the Masses. What must citizens in a republic believe and be prepared to do? What must they not think about and not be prepared to do? That determines the kind of education they receive. Consequently, it has to be different. What we are talking about today is education as a major vehicle to open up access to opportunity in today's world. We are talking about the kind of education that is going to build the skills and the insights necessary to make it possible for people to move up into positions of leadership and power and be able to function appropriately in them. The difference then is today we're talking about education that will create access. In the 17th and 18th century, they were talking about education where access was not a problem, it was a given. What they had to do was be able to perform once they got there. So what's the problem in today's world? The problem in today's world is that there are too many people who are reluctant to accept the fact, who are unwilling to believe that the majority of people that we would traditionally lump under the heading the masses are capable or qualified to enter these areas, to enter these levels. Therefore, they can't be taught the skills that would get them there. How do we keep them out? If they're able to do what we want our kids to be able to do, how do we keep them out? Education becomes a way that we can keep them out by saying they can't do this, they can't do that, they don't have these skills, they don't have those skills. If we provide these skills to these children when they're in the 3rd and 4th grade and build education from that point on accordingly on the possession of these skills and the ability to use them, we're going to be dealing with some pretty bright kids who are not going to be willing to accept positions of, I was going to say inferiority. Kids who are unwilling to accept the past, accept the status quo. We're going to be dealing with kids who have skills and abilities and dreams which they believe can take them as far as their abilities can take them. Once we give them these skills, we have lost the ability to exclude them from the process. Fighting the Common Core standards. Rejecting the Common Core standards seems to me to be, at least in part, the playing out of that denial process. Potentially, the Common Core standards make available the keys to opportunity in America to everybody. Many people, on second thought, have decided that they're not comfortable making those keys available. And the only way to do that is to reject the Common Core. And the only way to reject the Common Core is to do it by coming up with rationalizations and justifications and excuses which never get to the real essence of the issue. I would suggest to you that the substance of these learning outcomes, comparing important points and details in 2 texts on the same topic. If you gave me 5 children, we'll say, in grade 3 to do that with, and I did that, and then I had them at grade 4, and at each grade level after that, I could increase the complexity of the topics at issue. In other words, the kids would be exercising these skills in more and more complex, complicated situations. They would be comparing different points of view on more and more complex issues. Their ability to think, their ability to do research, their ability to collect data, their ability to evaluate resources, to evaluate data, to separate or distinguish the important information from the less important information. Their ability to solve problems. Their ability to confront new situations in positive ways. Their ability to master unfamiliar situations. All the things that we talk about as being failures in our education system would automatically be taken care of. Why won't we do it? I really believe, and I have to say this, because if I drop this subject and don't take it any further, I would be making a huge error. The vast majority of people who are opposed to the Common Core aren't opposed to it for these reasons. Most people don't understand them. Most people who oppose the Common Core oppose it because they came from the federal government, or because there's corporate money behind them, because the Gates Foundation is bankrolling the Common Core standards, because the federal government under the leadership of Arne Duncan was pushing them, because states are being browbeaten into accepting the Common Core by being offered access to all of this additional money for their education systems if they buy into the standards. All of these things, those are the reasons why people oppose the Common Core, because those are the reasons that they've been given for why the Common Core is not good. But if you go all the way back to the source of those arguments, who are the people that are putting together these arguments? And you were to trail and pursue the source of opposition to the Common Core, you would find the kind of academic talent that's being employed by groups like the American Legislative Executive Council, the ALEC group, and those kinds of things, that are being employed by big money to control the curriculum of our public school systems. They are the ones who don't want the Common Core. But they aren't going to lay out to the public at large why they are opposed to the Common Core, because it's an indefensible position. No, they're going to talk about Arne Duncan and about the power of the federal government and the power of big money and the Gates Foundation and corporate America is behind it and all of this other stuff. And so the real issue is, when we discuss the Common Core, we never really discussed the real issue. I hope, that some of the things we've been able to do today in this first hour of our program, actually we're close to about an hour and 15 minutes of our program. We've got about 17 minutes left in today's program. I hope that we've been able to touch on some of those, because I think these are really important. When I got my hands on these learning objectives and I saw them as 3rd and 4th grade, all of this stuff began to take shape in my mind. And I said, oh my God. Now I'm able to see from somebody who's actually doing it, one of the best funded educational systems in the country, the state of Connecticut educational system is considered to be among the best. I mean, the people who live there, it's the highest per capita income of any state in the union. These are people who will not accept anything less than excellence for the education of their children. And they have bought into this as the epitome of excellence. How in God's world, can good conscience, can we look at this and say, we don't want our kids to do this? We don't want our kids to have access to this. We don't want our kids to be near this. How can we do that and sleep at night? I think that this is extremely significant. How does it relate to the issue of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility? Well, I think it is the essence of what civic education and civic responsibility is about. I think that in terms of what we've seen in James Madison, what we've seen in his methodology for refining and enlarging the public views and building a citizenry that is willing to recognize self-interest, but also to see the dangers of self-interest and to see the need for putting self-interest aside in preference to the public interest, and to recognize that government's initial principal responsibility is to govern in the public interest for the good of everybody. Madison's entire system of political reality as laid out in the Constitution of the United States is built upon the basis of this interpretation of education for our citizens. And we are on the edge of denying access to this system to our young people. Our young people can't do it. It's asking too much of our young people. I mentioned yesterday that my wife on her way home yesterday was listening to a radio discussion, and one of the people being interviewed was a parent whose child was in a school where they had adopted Common Core. And she was saying, my children can't do this. Our kids can't do that. We're from West Virginia. Our kids can't do this. It's unfair to ask our kids to do this. All it does is put unfair stress. They're all going to be stressed out. They're all going to be psychological freaks. They're all going to be on medication of some kind. They're all going to be alcoholics or something. In other words, if you are convinced that your kids can't do it, then you never have to worry, because they never will. And the future will continue to look like the past. For you and for the children you brought into the world, and unfortunately for the children that they will bring into the world. It seems to me that this is a huge issue. This is what the concept of civic responsibility is all about. When we talk about Carl Becker's interpretation of the Declaration of Independence as dictating what the general public believes the Declaration of Independence is all about, we are talking about a definition of the Declaration that is quite consistent with what we've been talking about. We are talking about an interpretation of the Declaration of Independence which reinforces the worldview that traditionally has been destined and opened up and created for the masses. We are basically talking about an educational system that does not even make available access to interpretation, to alternative interpretations of the same issue. It seems to me that our young people early on in their school careers ought to be forced to confront the Declaration of Independence as articulated by Carl Becker and by Gary Wills, by John Locke, and by David Hume. And they should be required to confront the two to the degree, to the point that they are able to say, if we adopt this direction, what does that mean for the future? If we accept Carl Becker's interpretation as being gospel, as being absolute, and accept the fact that there is no other possibility, no other alternative, what does that mean in terms of rights, in terms of property rights, in terms of freedom, in terms of opportunity, in terms for real equality in our society. And if you really want to put something, an interesting caveat to all of this, think about those who advocate the idea of American exceptionalism. Those who support the concept of American exceptionalism see America as exceptional because of where it's been and what it's already accomplished. Those of us, I include myself in this group, I hope, who believe that America has the potential to be exceptional, base that potential on this reality. If we're willing to do this, we're willing to unleash our young people. We are willing to open up the minds of our young people and expose our young people to the skills and the talents and the opportunities available to them. We can be an exceptional nation. But I have to say that if we know that that opportunity is there and we choose not to take it, then we are far from exceptional. We are disgraceful for what we would do to our young people to deny them access to opportunities that we know they might be available to them if we but were willing to give them the opportunity. I really believe this. This particular document, it seems to me, is probably the most telling document I've seen on Common Core yet. I've read all the stuff about the reasons for it and the reasons against it and why we want it and why we don't want it and all the rest of it. But as I say, when you peel back all the cover and all the charade and you get right down to the nitty-gritty of the issue, I really think this is it. I really think that there's some people in this country who look at these objectives and say, I don't want everybody and anybody and everybody to have access to these things. I don't want real equality of opportunity. It's a nice thing to talk about, but let's face it. I'm very successful. I've earned my success. I've worked hard. I've earned the right to not have to interact on a day-to-day basis with these people. If I can afford it, I have the right to live in a gated community and to put a guard on the gate whose principal job is not to control who comes in, but to control who doesn't. Our education system, unfortunately, for many years and many generations, has been a vehicle which has perpetuated that system and those, I think, moral errors. I really believe that. So I do believe that all of this relates directly to the issue, if the issues associated with the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. The reason that I think that Carl Becker's interpretation of the Declaration of Independence is significant is not only because it's darn good. It's a classic. I'm not criticizing it. I think it has a lot to offer, a lot of substance, a lot of information. But to basically close the book on the Declaration of Independence and say, if you want to know what Jefferson's about, read Becker, which many people have done, They don't know they've done it, but that's really what's ended up in our textbooks. So in effect, what our textbook has to a large degree is what Becker has said, although they don't put Becker's name on it. That's all there is to the Declaration of Independence. So we never know that something like the Scottish Enlightenment, something like the interpretation of Gary Wills and those people that see the issues the same as those people even existed. And so we're able to perpetuate a definition of truth, which may not be truth at all. On tomorrow's program here at the Virtual Center, I'd like to continue this theme, but not so much the education one. I'd like to spend at least a portion of our time tomorrow looking at Charles Beard's economic interpretation of the Constitution. I'd like to spend some time on Charles Beard first, and then I'd like to spend some time on the impact of Charles Beard on Federalist Number 10 and the impact of Federalist Number 10 on the way today's American population at large seems to look at our political system. It seems to me that when we do that, we're going to be able to find justifications for and explanations of many of the political realities we see around us that we have difficulty trying to understand and explain. The dysfunction in our political system. The inability of people of different political philosophies and persuasions to get along. To look for things that they agree on rather than focus on the things that they don't agree on. I really believe that this is important. This is an important subject. Where I'd like to go after this, if it's okay with you, I've been spending some time over the last couple of weeks and I think I mentioned this before, on the emergence of political parties in the 1790s under Presidents Washington and John Adams. Specifically, the emergence of Hamilton's program as Secretary of the Treasury and the evolution of the political opposition under principally the leadership of James Madison in the early 1790s, and then eventually under the leadership of Thomas Jefferson, which gets Thomas Jefferson elected to the presidency in 1800. Because I think inherent in this is the evolution of a particularly unique definition of political parties, which fits our political system, but does not fit others. And I think we can see that evolution play out as we look at the period of the 1790s. And that's really where I'd like to go as we move into next week's programs. Right now, however, it seems to me we've just about reached the end of our day. I see about a minute left in our program before Rick Smith's program begins here on the Head On Radio Network. I'd like to thank you for your willingness to be with us today. I want to invite you to come back tomorrow. I hope that you have a wonderful evening. Please be safe. I trust that you will, many of you at least, will follow the political debate this evening. Perhaps we can spend some time tomorrow talking a little bit about it. I hope that it is a good debate. I hope it's a meaningful debate. And I hope that all of you enjoy it and that all of you will come back and join us again here at the Virtual Center. I also want to thank you and continue to urge you to support the Head On Radio Network and the alternative voice for the Internet in today's world. Thank you so very, very much. I appreciate it a lot. I hope that you have found today's program meaningful and somewhat helpful. Be safe, and again, thank you.